However they went about it, the English did get their colonies. And although they didn't intend to, they got far more than anyone else, and held them for longer. But even the arrogant English could scarcely have imagined some descendant being saluted as ruler of a quarter of the globe. Yet by the end of the 19th century, Britain was the ruler of well over 400 million people worldwide. That's about the population of modern Europe, with Pidgin English as a lingua franca. Pidgin means business, and from the beginning, the real language of the empire was business. From the very earliest days of British rule, the colonies were required to make money. Investors wanted two things: a return on their capital and a captive market for British goods. It was money, money, money that made the empire go round. Companies and trading partnerships invested where they saw opportunity. The British colonization of the globe began with opportunity, especially in the Caribbean. With possessions in the West Indies came slavery, such a profitable trade that in the early days there was more money in slaves than in sugar. But the investors and settlers weren't all joint stock operators. There were also, especially in America, people we'd recognize today as refugees, even as asylum seekers. They were British social, economic, religious, and political refugees. It's hard to believe now that with a population of fewer than 5 million, 17th century England felt that it had too many people. But it did. It couldn't feed them. One of the reasons to send settlers to America was to get rid of surplus English. Religious persecution of nonconformists in England and of Catholics in Ulster meant that America seemed to be a promised land. From about 1600 onwards, India was a place to make money, and a place where the individual might have a chance to live in a style in which he, mainly he, could probably never hope for at home. So those who followed the colonial path were usually looking for a better life and a richer one. Nothing wrong with that, you might think, and it certainly wasn't all plunder and pillage, as some would have us believe, but it's easy to see why some 20th century critics seized on the story of moneymakers and slave masters and said that the empire was a shameful part of Britain's history. But such doubts were already being expressed as early as the 18th century. So while some still want an apology from the British simply for having had an empire, others say that on balance it was not, after all, such a bad experience for colonized and settlers alike. Who's right? Is anyone? We mustn't duck these questions, but equally we mustn't approach what is, after all, one of the most astonishing adventures in British history with a closed mind. If we do, we'll miss some other questions and answers. For example, why did the British have an empire? Did they even know what they were building? The Spanish and the Portuguese had been doing it for close on a century before the English decided it was a good idea. Why were they so late starting? Where did it start? And why did it last so long? Finally, the big question. If empire was such a good scheme, why did it all come to an end? Was it a new sense of moral and social justice, or economic inevitability as the 19th century came to a close? It had seemed to be going well until then. Economically, the British had a dilemma. On the one hand, they could not afford their own empire, but on the other, they relied on the empire for trade. Thanks to the empire, and with the help of the Industrial Revolution, Britain was the biggest trading, insurance, shipping, banking, and manufacturing nation the world had ever seen. Almost a case of, you name it, the British are biggest at it. Big at money, big at language, and, importantly, big at religion. The empire was officially Protestant. It included Roman Catholics, Hindus and Muslims, as well as those who put their faith, for instance, in witch doctors and medicine men, but possession was declared in the name of a Protestant monarch. By the 18th century, the British believed that it was God's command that they ruled the waves. And after the Battle of Trafalgar, they did. No French or Spanish ensign would flutter for long before a broadside from the Royal Navy. No